Vinay Gupta, 1990s. I did 3D graphics and cryptography. Wrote my first, or helped write a substantial cryptographic application in 97, paid 100% in digital currency in 99. So all of my income went through digital cash in 99. Post 9/11, moved into the think tank world, spent a lot of time in defense, security, and resilience, invented things like Hexiar, which is pretty well known at Burning Man, open source, appropriate technology. And then 2014, left the defense game pretty much entirely and joined the Ethereum team, project manager the launch, and then set up Materium, which is a company that was intended to build the universal generic bridge between physical assets and Ethereum so that Ethereum could actually build out an ecosystem based on physical stuff. And it turned out to be much harder than expected. Having a pandemic and a few other things in the middle did not help that process, but the system is there. It's been live for 3 years. It can handle all asset classes that a lawyer can define, including gold, and more critically than that, real estate. And we're trying to get the Ethereum space to understand that like moving physical assets around tied to stuff like NFTs is a solved problem. And we'll do it for platforms, we'll do it for protocols, we'll do it for apps. We don't want to do our own deal origination. We just want to take other people's deals, and we will then provide a universal bridge for that stuff. And it works. I mean, it's it's a little clunky, it's a little complex. You still need to bring your own lawyers, but it actually works. Oh, in 172 countries.
Okay. So does the audience know about Materium? Does that make sense, how Vinay described it? Oh, okay. Yeah, one of the members has used the platform.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, you have slides, yeah? Would you like to go through those slides?
No, so I brought literally 2 slides, and I've showed both of them, right? So the important thing that I wanted to kind of get was this idea of converged social expectation. So the law is a system of people deciding on what is real and who owns what. Crypto is a set of people deciding on what is real and who owns what. And those two systems are in conflict in some areas, just as law in one country can be in conflict with law in another country. But there are also huge areas of overlap. So like copyright law is pretty much universally harmonized. Patent law is pretty much universally harmonized. Similarly, it's possible to find areas where the expectations of the crypto world and the expectations of the fiat world match. And in those areas, you could get cooperation between those two worlds, right? Not everything in crypto has to be legitimate and enforceable in the eyes of the law to be able to still do business in those worlds. The fiat world contains a bunch of non-crypto stuff. The crypto world contains a bunch of non-fiat stuff. But in the middle, you get things which are both fiat and crypto. And that exists because the two sets of social norms between those two tribes turn out to give you the same conclusions in that area. The crypto people derive it one way, the legal people derive it another way. And in the area where you get an overlap in agreement, it doesn't matter whether you're from the crypto side or the legal side, everybody is on the same side. And those areas, we started out with a zone that was roughly the size of a kind of sheet of paper, and we've now expanded that to be able to cover most of the world and real estate and all the rest of those kind of things. But it comes from this very careful process of aligning expectations. And that as a model, it's a different model of cooperation than from going around and trying to change the laws in the countries to try and terraform them for crypto. So that was slide 1, and then the other slide is just everything comes in layers, right? If you want to build these kind of systems, that converged space is created by having layer after layer after layer after layer of essentially conversion so that you get the norms to actually agree on the outcomes. It's not just that you've got two systems, you bang them up against each other. You actually need a whole bunch of buffering in the middle. And that is very much like the buffering between Ethernet cables and web browsers. There's many, 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 many layers of intervening stuff between the physical network hardware, the radios and the cables, and the application layer that actually uses your data. That's exactly the same kind of bridging that we're doing between real estate on one side and NFTs on the other. That layering approach is kind of how you get totally unlike systems to form these harmonized zones. So I wanted to kind of bring those in at the beginning because I think that helps to set the way in which we're approaching this. And then, of course, we can start talking about how this comes into the context that you're working.
Yeah. So one question I have, and I want to make sure that we focus on DEAC and all that as well, but nitty-gritty legal engineering because of what you just said. This is definitely something I've thought about quite a bit. So I'm wondering your take. But the bundle of rights and obligations with traditional property, oftentimes legalese will discuss assets and traditional property, and then they'll discuss owning digital assets as such. And so I've found that's traditional English law with writs way when that's all you could do litigation. You could do writ, and it was very, very creative at the end of that. That's kind of what I'm seeing replicated now with using legalese to describe digital assets. And so that overlap for me, I'm trying to have it just be signatures. So when I talk about legalese, I just say, well, look, this is the aux address and it's doing e-signatures. And then I don't even describe the digital assets as a type of property. But what your strategy is there to not bring in all this legacy weight that then, just even if a lawyer has to spend an hour to translate, well, there you go. That's $2,000, $3,000 gone for the top lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, for us, as far as possible, we try and do it the hard way. And then template it and reuse it and reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. So, our basic take on this is, I'll frame this exactly. So, we are a creature of the City of London, right? And the City of London is basically a 1,400-year-old special economic zone. Right? In 1066, when the Norman conquest arrived and installed the current UK system, the City of London was a walled medieval city, and rather than invade the city, they just cut a deal with the city, and a treaty was signed, and the City of London continued to be quasi-autonomous inside of England since that point. It's very akin to an SPV, an SEZ, right? ZEDEZ. So the City of London approach for dealing with the nation state, they've got 1,000 years of maintaining this quasi-autonomous status, and they have a really sophisticated playbook for dealing with the nation state, right? One of the critical tools in that playbook is a written agreement. And, the term barrister comes from a class of people that lived in the pubs that were halfway between the English government and the City of London, and people from both sides would walk to those pubs or ride to those pubs, sit down, have a few drinks, make agreements, and the lawyers would then write down those agreements, and those people became known as barristers. They literally were people that worked in bars. The idea that contract law as we understand it, was originally structured as a way of negotiating between a special economic zone and the national government. You see what I'm saying? Right? Law is the natural interface layer between weird jurisdiction. Oh, the City of London, that's a weird thing. Yes, it is a weird thing. How does it negotiate with Westminster? Everybody writes down their expectations, and as long as the document is correct, everything is fine. Right? Well, we all agreed that's what we were going to do, didn't we? Yes, we did. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So if you think of it being that way, as long as the people on the crypto side and the people on the fiat side are in agreement about what gets done at the end of the process, no problem. Right? Now, our approach to that favors the fiat side because what we're chasing is real estate, right? We think that there's basically $3 trillion a year of transactions which are being done with paper systems in many cases. If Ethereum is going to have a future, it's going to have a future pushing real estate, right? The question we always ask is, why does the world's largest asset class not have a global electronic exchange? Well, the answer is obviously it should. Legal problem, right? If we were slightly on the other side of that fence, if we were mainly interested in IP licenses, then at that point, we would have a much less legally heavy and much more technically heavy approach, and you'd start talking about technology for doing things like checking licenses. Much more lightweight, much more fluid, but because the people that we have to convince at the end of the day are real estate lawyers, it tends to be a clunkier approach.
I come from entertainment law, so yeah, it makes sense actually.
Yeah. So entertainment law, you think of how fast moving you have to be for entertainment law. Like you need to get that stuff licensed onto t-shirts before everybody forgets who those people are. Whereas real estate, it's like, well, maybe 2027, we're going to start pouring the concrete, like between now and then, we got to go through this zoning process and and, so you've got to work at the speed of your customers. And if you're faster than your customers, that really hurts, right? Like you can get into all kinds of tangles, not by being too slow, but by being too quick.
So yeah. And there's, as you say, Burns, right? There's already rough consensus globally on how that works. So time immemorial, as far as I understand that is it Henry VIII, or am I off there where that when Anglican Church took the crown basically took all the land and there we go. So yeah, so that's kind of, do you think, since you're talking real estate, is that the level we got to do, where we got the land title registry? I mean, that was pretty heavy.
Yeah, I mean, so the way that I look at it is this, right? The correct way of modeling this is construction of layers. All of the states provide two national registers, right? They provide many, but there are two that you can always count on being there. Number one is a register of corporations, and number one is a register of land. Right, so there's a land registry and there's a corporate registry. In America, of course, it's a bit screwed up because the land registry is county by county by county because the Americans are anarchists. Everybody remember, America calls itself a republic, but that was only to make its anarchy look respectable. And then the American anarchy collapsed in 1930. But it was, to all intents and purposes, an anarcho-syndicalist nation until the invention of income tax. This is why America, by the way, is so schizophrenic. It sold itself to the Europeans as being a republic. It sold itself to its own elites as being a republic, but actually it was functionally anarchist. Right? Tax collection was pushed down to the lowest possible level in a model you'd recognize as subsidiarity. So, America aside for a moment, we'll come back to the Yanks. So, you take your land register and you just take the land and you put it inside of a corporation on the corporate register. Right, the asset is encased in an SPV, and then everything that the SPV does in terms of contract law, until there is a dispute, right, until somebody sues somebody, the state doesn't care what you're doing with those contracts. As long as nobody cries foul, the state totally ignores contracts between private individuals. So at that point, what you kind of get is this thing of like, here's the docking adapter, the real estate's in an SPV, locked in. Right? The real estate is then transferred around via some set of contractual obligations that don't require you to move it around out of the SPV. All the state sees is this corporation owns this property and a bunch of contracts that the state doesn't care about because nobody sued him. And at that point, you have a convergence of perspective. Who owns this piece of land? XYZ Corp. Okay, great. Does everybody XYZ Corp owns the land? Yeah, absolutely. And who currently has the legal right to the land? Whoever's holding the following token. Is there any fight about who owns the token? No. Is there any fight about the binding between the corporation and the token? No. So we, the government, could completely ignore this? Yeah. And off you go to the races, right? So this is an approach which requires neither forgiveness nor permission. From the state side, this is simply business as usual. And from the crypto side, whoever has the token owns the land. And if you have to ever fight about that in a court, the court will agree that whoever owns a token owns the land because that's what the freaking contract says. Right? And that as an approach, you can see how the construction of the layering removes the conflict between the fiat side and the crypto side. The crypto side norms and the fiat side norms, everybody agrees how that stuff is going to work.
So I guess thinking about title ownership and beneficial ownership, I get the beneficial keeping. I mean, we can do what we want with beneficial, but for the land title, so I ultimately you're working in jurisdictions where it's not the U.S. county. Because I mean, in Prospera,
it's still just an SPV. Right? So if you've got a county title, the county title, what's on the county register is the county says XYZ Corp owns the land. No problem. Right? And all of this stuff is standard commercial real estate practice. Nobody blinks when they see that a mall or a hotel is owned by a corporation. They don't blink when they see a chateau is owned by a corporation. There's no ripple on the fiat side. And the reason I'm kind of harping on this is there was a point in crypto where crypto decided that its business was beef with US government, right? And that point was not the 2008 white paper, right? The point where crypto decided that its job was to beef with the US government was really when WikiLeaks started to raise money in crypto, right? And that's quite late in the game, right? I want to say, was it 2012, the crypto blockade of the crypto blockade breaking for WikiLeaks? Yeah, banking blockade, 2011, banking blockade really began to kick in. So when WikiLeaks started to accept it, what you got was an enormous influx of Bitcoin supporters who were WikiLeaks people first. So they came in with the WikiLeaks anti-government attitude, and then that became seen as being the Bitcoin attitude. Prior to 2011, it was really a very, very anarchist-shaped project. You made Bitcoin on your laptop at home overnight. You didn't buy Bitcoin. There was no ASIC mining. Bitcoin was a thing that you made rather than the thing that you purchased. And nobody was really sure what it was for, what it was about. It was very experimental. It was very academic. Right? Then the WikiLeaks folks arrived, and the WikiLeaks folks were at war. Right? The state is evil. The state is going to screw us over. The state is breaking its own rules to attack us. And then you see what they did to Assange, and it's like, oh my God, no kidding, you guys were at war. But that consciousness becomes the common norm in crypto because 80% of the people in crypto by, say, 2012 or 2013 had that story in their heads that we're in a direct conflict with the state. We're not in a direct conflict with the state. The state is a sinking ship. It is desperately struggling for survival because reality is moving so quickly, the state cannot keep up and it cannot maintain basic services. Right? Boeing cannot get its astronauts back from the shuttle, not from the shuttle, from ISS, right? You know, hi, this is America. This is our premier aerospace company. It's called Boeing. They make all manner of things, classified and unclassified. They're providing an essential service, which is taking American astronauts to the International Space Station and dumping them there because the damn thing is not safe to come home in, right? The state's in deep trouble. The state is looking for options, right? And the negotiation where the states are in deep trouble and they're looking for options, they're like a medieval institution like the church. And the church has enormous problems maintaining support from people because it's a medieval institution that's having a hard time adapting to the current age. The state is in exactly the same position as the church is in. It's got a very hard time adapting to the modern world. The state is losing power in the same way that the Vatican lost power. And the negotiating position from crypto relative to the state should have been, look, we got a bunch of technocratic power over here. You've got a bunch of compiling power over there. But in the middle, you've got a staggering amount of structural inefficiency and grifting from the financial sector. Right? So here's the deal. This financial sector is going to get squeezed between the technologists and the state until its margins come down to a tenth of a percent. And the process of doing that is going to basically generate wealth for the society and revenue for the state on a huge scale. Right? We're going to take a staggeringly huge, staggeringly inefficient, broken industry, and we're going to make it behave. And of course, after 2008, the state hated finance because the finance guys had lived high on the hog for decades and then stuck the public with a bill. Oh, we're all bankrupt now. You have to bail us out in the tax dollar. Well, what if we don't? Well, your economy will collapse. So you better give us the money. So the state hated finance and to some degree still does hate finance. But because of this accident history, the path dependency where we started on the WikiLeaks track, we didn't get into a position of it being a straight deal. Look, you hate the finance guys, we hate the finance guys. We're going to cut their margins to a 20th of what they are now, and we're going to cut the benefit 50-50 between tech and the state. How does that sound? Oh, Screw the finance guys. Yeah, screw the finance guys. Why screw the finance guys? Well, they just screwed over the state, didn't they? Right. So that misunderstanding of the alignment between the state and crypto is an accident of history. The state does not hate crypto. What the state hates is not being able to collect taxes. And the number one threat to the state's ability to collect taxes is not crypto. We're not even number 7 on that list. The vast majority of the hiding of money is being done by money laundering from huge entities like HSBC. Right? The state's inability to tax is largely offshore finance and the big 4 doing tax consultancy for billionaires. So, if we get this right, we are not in a fight with the state. There is a huge area of convergence. And then right on the outside rim, there's DarkFi, right? There's anonymous banking. There's payments that are being made between individuals that are not named. There's this thin sliver on the outside of that stuff, which is a direct conflict between the money launderers and crypto for who's going to handle the black money. And this model, I'm not saying I completely believe this model or I completely agree with this model, but that is a model of how we make peace with the state. Because if we don't figure this out pretty quickly, imagine the mess that America is going to make of crypto by the time you've got the Republicans and Democrats fighting about crypto in the same way they fight about guns.
Well, I mean, it's already happening. I've been
Already
doing some push that I got burned on a little bit, but it's important. I guess so. I get that for distributed ledger technology and RPCs. Already, RPCs have created a huge market effects or dynamic complexity. That's brilliant. Something like e-gold and why that, especially from a DAC perspective, this is the separation of money and state. So I thank you for opening my mind and heart to the distributed ledger stuff. But what about the money, and especially because finance, that's where it is at its core.
So the US government doesn't have a hostile relationship with other countries' money. They don't hate the euro. They have a little bit of grumbling about the euro, but if you take I don't know, pick some small country that has its own money, like UK pound, right? There we go. The US government does not hate the pound. They don't hate other people's money, right? Some bunch of nerds are going to make their own money. Sure enough, yeah, fine, that's a little weird. Silicon Valley's always been filled with strange people. Well, they're not really Silicon Valley. Well, I don't care. They're still nerds, right? The only reason that the US government hates Bitcoin is because Bitcoin says we're going to kill the dollar and replace it with Bitcoin. And at that point, the US government is like, well, I mean, guys, no, you're really not going to do that. No, right? But because we told them that we were their enemies, right? At that point, the state is like, well, I guess these must be the bad guys then. And off you go with the races, right? If it had just been funny-looking technology money, yeah, some tech people, they're making their own money. Oh, you mean like World of Warcraft gold? Yeah, it's exactly like that. How much of that stuff is there anyway? Oh, about $1 trillion. $1 trillion? Wow, right? We should buy some of that, right? Because there's no reason for the state to be hostile to people making their own money. Everybody, all nation states are making their own money. Adding one more funny-looking thing with a bunch of tech people making their own money, the state would never have considered that to be an issue right up until the point where it became so large that they had to start thinking about it, right? But when you've got people front and center making the tax starvation argument and framing it as, Bitcoin is going to blind the US government, blah, 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 you tell them why you're the bad guys in their story, and then you get surprised when they respond to it. All of this stuff is, and I use this word advisedly, utter morons, right? Who are playing a story inward facing to the crypto community, right? And they're only thinking of what is going to get more people into crypto, what is going to get more people into crypto, what is going to get more people into crypto. And they're telling that story. But what they don't understand is that the state also hears that story and the state believes that story, right? So because we have taken this massively anti-state perspective, what we've done is we've trained the state to think of crypto as being a threat. Unsurprisingly, once you tell the state that you're its deadly enemy, the state gets the mallet out and you get things like Gensler, right? But actually, the state doesn't care, right? If crypto had basically said, look, we are going to establish an enclave on the internet where people are going to buy and sell intellectual property licenses and software licenses using a currency that is privately issued by technologists. The odds that we would be locked into an adversarial relationship with the US government at this point are approximately zero. Right? They would not care. We would be slotted into the US federal model of the world, somewhere between the credit card companies and the baseball card companies. And that'd be it. Nobody would care. Right? But because the message that was used to build the base was anti-state, 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 what we've done is we've trained them to think of us as being the enemy. And now that they are trained to that, what we have is Donald Trump basically defecting and taking a massively anti-government stance, kind of largely out of desperation. Let's remember that he did this before he got shot. Right? And now we're stuck in the middle of a two-party fight in America. Right? We are not stuck in the middle of a two-party fight in Europe, and we are not stuck in the middle of a two-party fight in the UK, in London. Right? Europe has a perfectly ordinary bureaucratic response, which is we're going to tie everything up in red tape until nothing works. Welcome to Europe. London has a perfectly normal London response, which is like, if we cover that in lawyers, we can probably get it through. Okay, fine, send the lawyers. Right? And that's kind of where Materium fits. Materium is part of the City of London ecosystem that is figuring out how to make crypto work for London. And London is still the world's largest financial center.
So I guess when you're saying before the finance guys, I was taking that, but then also London is the finance guy. So how are we?
Well, right. So
Yeah.
at the risk of talking about too much secret sauce here, and if I seem like I'm leaving something out of this story, I am. If you want to do a transaction, you will do that transaction where it is most efficient to do that transaction. Right? So if you've got a choice between any financial center in the world, you will do it on the one that has the lowest transaction costs and the fastest and most reliable delivery, right?
Since Rome.
So if London has a slick and efficient relationship with blockchain technology, given that the UK kicked itself out of the European Union and has desperate problems figuring out what we actually do for a living, there might be a certain amount of willingness to embrace new technology and potentially lower margins in the name of becoming more competitive. Right? And if anybody's interested in that story, the UK Law Commission has a page about the Electronic Trade Documentation Act, UK ETDA, and there's an estimate on there. Remember, Law Commission is a kind of an arm of UK government, kind of, sort of. Law Commission says, well, there's potentially £224 billion a year of efficiency savings just from using the blockchain in international shipping. That sounds to me like an entrepreneurial state that's trying to figure out where the money is in an environment where it has no money. Well, you can do it in London, it's a little more efficient. And then we keep some of the money. Yes, right. And that's the negotiating position that we, Materium, right? Me and Anton Shalapanov, who is my managing director. Anton is a lobbyist of legendary effectiveness in criminal justice, right? So he's been all over the world sorting out criminal justice legislation to be kinder and better to prisoners. He fought tuberculosis in prisons for a decade. I mean, he's a super hardcore guy, but he knows how to do things like implement international treaties. Right? He's been in the machinery of international treaties. So Anton ran the interface, basically helping teach the UK legal community and the judges why the blockchain was a system for storing evidence. Well, it's a permanent record of exactly who said what when, and it can never be edited. Oh, so we just put all the evidence on the chain, right? Party A and Party B are going to do a deal. And every time something happens, they write it on the chain and the other party countersigns that that document is correct. So they've got a shared narrative about the history. Yeah, you could totally do that. Oh, that sounds really useful. Why doesn't everything work that way? And that's literally what the UK judiciary comes back with. So that document is called the UK Jurisdiction Task Force Digital Dispute Resolution Rules, signed off by the most senior judge in the UK for commercial law, a guy called Sir Geoffrey Voss, the master of the rules. The master of the rules goes back 800 years, something like that. And he's got a document that he published that says, look, by the way, in the future, all transactions will be done on the blockchain. it's as inevitable as everything moving online was in 1995. So you've got various arms of the UK political machinery all converging on the idea that efficient transactions using crypto are, a hugely important platform for the UK as a government, right, as a nation state. But most of that stuff is not being pushed by Westminster. It's mostly not being pushed by the national government. Mostly it's being pushed by the City of London, which of course is one of the world's largest and oldest financial centres. And it has a quasi-independent thing left over from the negotiations 1,000 years ago. And so you
Okay,
wind up, you see what I mean about there's a basically entrepreneurial approach to the blockchain. There is no reason that couldn't be the way that we worked with any government other than the Americans, right?
I really like the London angle. I do personally have a question I'd like to go into probably in a different talk because I'm mindful of time about how tax is so problematic. It's this Kafkan psychological nightmare where you have to give up a huge money to someone you don't know why, and you have to spend all the attention on right. So it's like doubly. If you just want to have someone piss you off, like do with the IRS, But
AI will solve the paperwork problems.
Yeah, and it blocked, right? Like just gas fees, all that. We can really
all the rest of that. Yes.
So that's really key because it really is messing with the society that psych just not thinking through things. So yeah, so Kiba, what's your question?
Yeah, I think I have a question. I don't know yet, but so going back to DIAC, you kind of mostly not mostly, but talk a lot about real estate and how material helps with real estate. And the reason why I personally don't invest in real estate is because I wanted to be able to defend my assets, and that's why I like crypto because it's very cheap to defend my crypto versus property. If you have a gun and commit violence if someone actually tries to take it from you. And so I'm sure you're aware of the Ethereum reality service, and it's this concept of having more secure chips embedded to objects to kind of prove ownership and things like that. So I'm curious, kind of what the pros and cons are of using material. And I guess it's more like an abstract framework that applies to any assets versus something like a Ethereum reality service where if you can prove ownership of assets, but they're more concealable or more easy to protect.
Yes, so I got the question. Let me pop this up again. So what I'm mainly concerned with is establishing the largest possible converged area in the middle here, because that large converged area in the middle here protects all of the stuff on the blue crypto side, right? So if we've got hundreds of billions of dollars of real estate transactions running over Ethereum, all of those people are now our friends, our protectors, our allies, right? And if you then have fringe, which is pirate finance, offshore, outside of the purview of the state, everyone's anonymous and it's truly dark, odds are that nobody's going to shut down a huge engine for clearing real estate because there are a bunch of folks in the corners doing the same kind of stuff that used to get done in the Cayman Islands, right? So the objective is that you build a very large book of legitimate business that protects the technology. And then at that point, the policy questions of what's happening in the corners, somebody else's problem, right? And, I came out of the Ethereum team with 2 rounds of failed crypto revolution under my belt, right? We talked about privacy, all that we got out of the entire 1990s movement for private communications. The only thing that lasted out of that was private communications between individuals and corporations to give them your credit cards, right? All the technology out PGP, which was the privacy layer that was designed to protect email communications, it was the first stuff about self-sovereign identity. All the rest of those systems, culture changed. All of that stuff basically got dumped on the wayside. The corporations took the one thing that was useful, which was the ability to move credit cards from a person to them, and then they issued digital certificates to all the corporations to give them secure digital identity, and that became the backbone of e-commerce. That's the little browser padlock. All of the social change stuff just went straight out the window, and what we got was browser padlock and e-commerce. Great, well, there was the first generation of cypherpunk, right? All the e-gold stuff, privately issued gold-backed digital currency, Chaumian digital cash backed by gold tokens, basically wiped out by 9/11, because at that point it was very clear that you couldn't do pirate finance. Right now, the equivalent threat is the freaking Russians and potentially the Iranians using crypto to evade sanctions. Right? We are going to get our asses kicked if that turns out to be a big deal. So what I'm basically suggesting is that the mainstream legitimate use cases are the things that protect the people that are interested in, let's call it radical sovereignty. Right? And the radical sovereignty people are a small percentage of the population. Right? They're an extremely important percentage of the population, but those values are not going mainstream anytime soon. Right? The vast majority of the population wants socialized health care and socialized national defense. There is a very small fringe of innovators that want radical responsibility. And this is kind of like the difference between, the folks that go to the Burning Man and the folks that think the Burning Man is a good way to get your ass killed. Right? In truth, nobody ever dies at Burning Man. It's a perfectly safe place, generally speaking. But the perception that it's a super high frontier and it's all crazy and dangerous and weird is the common perception for nearly everybody in America. And then there are a small percentage of people that are just like, that's my homeland. So my suggestion is that the kind of radical self-sovereignty, radical autonomy perspective is kind of in the same cultural terrain as Burning Man. It's for people that are very self-reliant and people that are very hard-headed. And it's very important that that space is there because those people are extremely important. But the mainstream just wants not to get ripped off when they buy a house. And so what we have to accept is that the kind of radical self-reliance angle on crypto is a minority sport. And the vast majority of use cases are just going to be cutting transaction costs in TradFi, which is what we should expect.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely makes sense, like what you're saying, and especially as like a business model for Ethereum. But yeah, still going back to like the sovereign kind of individual stuff. If I can, have some chip that can cryptographically prove that I own some asset, and then use zero knowledge proofs that this asset falls under some classification or whatever, without actually revealing what I own. Like, why would I use Ethereum versus this more cryptographic use case?
So I think I heard that correctly. So there is a huge amount of space for, taking assets out of this kind of converged area, wrapping them up in snarks, and then pumping them across through the dark space. Right? And that kind of stuff is the same sort of social structure as taking an asset and having it be owned by some offshore law firm in the Caymans, and then it's protected by Cayman's banking privacy law. It's the same kind of schema as numbered Swiss bank accounts were for the Swiss. The state tolerates a certain amount of that stuff because they use it themselves and because it's just too expensive to shut it all down. And crypto is probably the latest innovation in that fringe. But crypto cannot survive if that's all that we do. Right? If crypto is just this small sliver of hardcore self-sovereign privacy, etc., folks, if that's the only place that crypto exists, the state can just draw a ring around that and say no, and then anything that's in that world will never be able to get back into the real world. It will become tainted money permanently, and there'll be all kinds of legal consequences for touching it. What you need is for that stuff to be 0.5% of the transactions on crypto. Right? And if that stuff is 0.5% on the transactions on crypto, the governments will kind of yell at it and they'll make noises and they'll get pissed off when they run into it. But for the most part, they'll ignore it in the same way that they ignore people buying weed on street corners in cash. Right? The governments are happy to ignore things which are slightly dirty because everything a government touches is slightly dirty. Right? They try and buy sheets for a hospital, they're going to get ripped off one time in 25. One time in 250. There's always a little bit of graft, there's always a little bit of corruption. You can't ever get it completely clean. The governments just live with it. Right? And getting very large mainstream use cases for crypto anchors the economy, anchors the technology, anchors the value, and that's what makes a space where the kind of libertarian anarcho-capitalist fringe can live in peace and safety. Right? But if we try and scale an uncapped fringe to 25 million people on American soil, we're going to wind up in a head-on confrontation with the feds. Now, let me add one bookmark to that. There is also the possibility that the US government collapses and the dollar implodes. Right? And there is also a strategy which is like the dinosaurs have all been killed by the asteroids, and then the mammals erupt out of the corners and change the way that the entire world works, right? And I think that the core argument from Bitcoiners for why Bitcoin is valuable is that it's a hedge against the US government collapsing and the dollar dying. And I think that's 100% rational. I don't think there's anybody in Washington that doesn't look at the US national debt and the amount of debt that the individuals are carrying and that doesn't see a massive reset of the currency coming. But the question is when and how and on what terms, right? I mean, when Donald Trump was like, well, we've got $35 trillion worth of debt, maybe we should pay it in crypto. You know, like that's weird times. So the idea of kind of playing nice with the state and getting the legit use cases to be as large as possible, it's good for the mainstream. It also provides a little bit of breathing space for the fringe. But in the event that there is a serious detonation of the financial system, you get a 1929 style wipeout, you could very easily see crypto becoming the dominant force in finance and the world's de facto international currency. And I think that's 100% rational, but poking the bear by telling them that's what we're waiting for is also not smart, right? Let the government try and figure out if it can save itself. At the end of the day, we're not going to influence it one way or the other. The dollar is theirs to either break or save. And if there's an alternative in the corners, that's fine.
So I have a similar strategy myself with I'm focusing on those RPCs right now and NFT platforms being like a barber. And that's in part because of what we learned in entertainment with RIA going after customers because they were sharing pirating stuff. But then once we finally had a consumer class with YouTube and then people can use Pirate Bay all day long and it's fine. So get a big enough consumer class and then the more enclave groups can kind of just do what they want and so keep it. Maybe that's the answer, or again, maybe it becomes mainstream. There's another question. So let's
talk about those enclaves very briefly for a second. So the scientific method was incubated in an enclave. Right? The thing we think of as science was a couple hundred people in a secret society figuring out repeatable experiments. If those enclaves go, if they're squashed culturally, progress just stops, right? So that innovator fringe protecting its own interests and building potential models in the future, it's super critical to human progress that survives. And again, we've got historical records, thousands of years of those kind of enclaves. It's very important that we don't detach ourselves from that past. We're the same people that built the Royal Society back in the day.
Yeah, the Irish civilization. Yeah, that was also an enclave, right? Yeah. Yep.
You made really interesting points, and none of them seem that hard to understand, especially around we need to have the masses on our side, and we need to sell a vision, a positive vision. Why, in your view, are we so bad at this, aside from the fact that we had a small group of people that had an enemy vision? And what needs to happen to get there within, let's say, the Ethereum ecosystem? Because it feels like this is really obvious stuff, even though it's sometimes not. But yeah, I just feel like, yeah, what is the hold up in us actually getting to a point of being able to communicate effectively?
Could you very briefly repeat the question here, unfortunately?
Sure. Yeah, everything you've said makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh, great.
At the same time, none of it seems particularly, it seems fairly obvious stuff as well, or it should be obvious. I'm just trying to understand why you think it is that we, let's say, in the Ethereum ecosystem, are so bad at communicating the positive vision that we have for the masses. And what actually needs to happen for us to get to a point where this actually happens and that we become not the enemy. And yeah, I just like, I feel like it's very straightforward stuff in theory. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, my take on this is that Vitalik basically is Ethereum's CTO, not Ethereum's CEO. right? As far as Vitalik is concerned, if the technology works, his job is done, and somebody else will figure that out. But Ethereum has never figured out who it is that is going to figure that out, right? For a while, Consensus was kind of holding the flag of we're going to get this thing mainstreamed, and that was Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and that worked reasonably well up to a point, but they never really got over the hump onto the other side. And when Enterprise Ethereum Alliance kind of stopped growing, that was kind of the last real attempt at doing outreach to the corporates in the States. And it's basically just an attribute of decentralization that to keep things extremely decentralized, Ethereum has never spoken with a single voice. But as a result, what happens is that people tell messages that work locally, but that don't work globally.
So it's kind of like if you're really spicy, you get attention from the wider community, and we see in social media is just, yeah.
And this is exactly it, right? People take extreme polarized positions that get them up to 15, 25,000 followers on Twitter. And then at that point, they kind of stop growing at that point because that's their natural audience. And we've got maybe 500 of those people, but everybody is telling a story that gets them a small following and gives them the ability to get some local stuff done. We don't really have anybody negotiating with the American government, right? I spent years essentially in an ambassadorial relationship with the City of London Financial Centre, building out a zone of shared understanding. If anybody's interested in that stuff, internetofthings.com/law. So that's a 2017 conference at which we had a whole bunch of serious law people from the UK. And those folks became, kind of of the shared understanding that formed between the UK law firms, regulators. That backbone of we're all sort of speaking the same language here. That came out of. I'll just share screen on this for a second.
And so that's what you're suggesting needs to happen is almost like I guess in the U.S. that was educating the staff in lobbying speak, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So we're about to get a chance to negotiate with the US government. So yeah, internetofagreements.com/law. And all the talks are on there. There's just a ton of material.
Oh, wow.
The audio kind of sucks. There was a problem with the audio on the main recorder, so it all came off a backup recorder. We've not actually sat down and cleaned that up with AI yet, but that might be a thing we try this year because I think we finally got algorithms that will do a good job of it. But if you are have problems with the audio, the other conferences, the audio is pristine. The first one, something went wrong. Unbelievably annoying. So what I'm basically suggesting is this. The Democrat Republican dogs now have one end of blockchain chew toy each. Right? Here's your Rottweiler, here's your pit bull, here's the rubber thing in the middle that squeaks. Right? And it's exactly it's going to wrestle over this thing in the same way they wrestle over the gun lobby. The Democrats don't really want guns to go away. They just want to raise money by getting people angry about guns. Similarly, the Republicans don't really want to just abolish gun restrictions completely, because if they do that, it's no longer a campaign plan. Right? They just want it as a political football that they can kick around to extract money from the firearms lobby and to extract money from the firearms industry. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to force crypto into the same corner the gun lobby is in, and the Democrats and the Republicans will cooperate, squeeze as much money out of crypto, money and power out of crypto as they can into their own pockets. And a lot of people want that as being victory. Oh, we finally gotten the respect of the US government. Look, they're squeezing us exactly like they do the gun industry. Not the position we want to be in. Right? We want to be in a position where we are largely insulated from partisan politics. The old insulation was nobody understood crypto well enough to argue that it was important to the government. Right? Now, whether people understand crypto or not, everybody's agreed it's important to government, and it's going to turn into an absolute scrum over the course of this electoral cycle and probably over the course of the next administration. Right? And I think it's going to be very, very, very volatile between now and when the election happens, and indeed when power transfers, because the race is so close that crypto support and crypto money, something like what, 50% of American men between 20 and 30 years old own some crypto? They're people that traditionally don't vote. The idea that you could mobilize those people to vote and donate, right? There's just a lot going on. And I think that the industry is very poorly prepared to deal with that kind of stuff because most of the people that are running those negotiations don't have any idea what government is. They're naive, so they're super aggressive.
A bit of an industrial complex, if the simple made easy guys. So not complex, I'm thinking, but complex. But I can do one follow up and then we're over time. But
Okay,
yeah, what
cool.
is their follow?
Yeah, what can we do? Like, what is the good scenario? How do we get it right? Like, because this is all like what's bad and what we have done wrong. But like, how do we get there?
Yes. So I it's basically what are your solutions? I interpreted what you just said as part of your solution set, but if you could maybe say in very clear.
Sure. So here's
what
the
is this?
solution in a nutshell. It's really simple. There are two staggeringly large global industries that are pre-digitization. Real estate is one of them, and international shipping is the other. Right? Both of those industries carry trillions of dollars of transactions a year. Pre-digitization, it's all on paper, right? Sometimes that paper is emailed PDF files, but for the most part, it's pre-digitization. If crypto goes in and digitizes real estate and digitizes international shipping and solves a whole bunch of fundamental structural problems in those industries in the process, right? For real estate, the problem is it's too slow and expensive to move real estate around. It's also very hard to get capital into real estate projects, resulting in housing shortages, right? Solve those problems, everybody loves you. In shipping, the problem is how do I tell whether or not there are Chinese components in this highly sensitive medical device? Right, okay, we got to figure that out, and it's slow, and it's inefficient, and you've got all kinds of piracy and fraud. Right, Amazon getting hauled into government and yelled at for selling counterfeit goods to Americans on Amazon.com. That is a crypto problem. It's provenance and supply chain. If crypto goes out and solves problems in the real world, the state cannot shut it down without proposing alternative solutions to those problems. If we're doing hundreds of billions of dollars of real estate transactions a year, $500 billion worth of international shipping, the cargoes on chain, well, if you break the blockchain with too much regulation, you're going to wind up forcing these companies into bankruptcy because they cannot go back to paper. And what we do is we get big, powerful companies lobbying to leave the blockchain alone because it's critical to international shipping and it's critical to home building in America. Oh yeah, we financed 25,000 apartments in Austin, Texas using this blockchain-based thing, and you're not going to tell me that you're going to break that system for partisan politics unless you tell me how we're going to build the next 25,000 apartments. We have to solve real-world problems to get a permanent seat at the global table, which is what we really want. We want our values permanently represented at the global level. If the blockchain fixes international shipping and fixes real estate transactions, you're not going to shut us down, ever.
I can't remember his name right now, but the guy who made ERC 721, the Ethereum cat herder interview with him, he explains that he made it really for this purpose. I'm coming again from kind of the music publishing side of entertainment, the global repertoire database, how it failed, PRO tried to get it going, and knowing why labels don't have their databases online, and it's all digital, it's offline. Amount of cost when you buy another catalog to reconcile, that's all a feature. This is a big lift, I believe, but it is what we should still continue to focus on. I also agree with you. And so with that, a couple extra comments, but yeah, I want to be,
I don't want to hold you guys back. So basically, yes, it is hard, but the crypto industry has got $2 trillion worth of assets, and it's not $2 trillion hard, right? It might be $500 million worth of work, but we must have spent, 3 times that, 5 times that, 10 times that, building nonsense, right? We're in a position where crypto is basically like a bunch of 6-year-olds that have gotten access to the refrigerator. They have now eaten so much ice cream that they can no longer walk, right? Somebody has to go and put some hamburgers on the grill, right? And okay, sure, it's slow and it's hard. You know, Ethereum is 7 years in solving this problem. We started in 2017 because I'd seen two failed crypto revolutions before, right? I'd seen beautiful, promising ecosystems that had revolutionary potential to make everybody's lives better, to solve real problems. I'd watched two of these things get sandbagged out of existence when the state finally took notice of them. And I did not want to see a third one. So what I figured out is we had to find a different way of approaching the state that was not rooted in old school adversarial modeling. We had to find a way of figuring out how to get a political alliance formed around crypto that had enough momentum to negotiate rather than just get crushed. Right? And that structure, it's real estate and it's shipping. It's getting those people on board. The final thing I'll say is it's real estate, it's shipping, it's also space. On the Internet of Agreements website, you can see the first space conference that was ever done on crypto, 2018. We've put that thing on, internetofagreements.com/space. We now have two clients in the space industry, one of which is widely thought to be the best proposal for getting human habitation on the moon. And the space industry is potentially the third thing because what they need is finance for getting stuff into orbit. And they also need record keeping for who's on what orbits and how you do things like send a space tag over to somebody else's asset, pull it up into a higher orbit, you know, and then charge somebody money for having done that work. And you need to make sure the insurance is in place and the permissions and the software and compatibility between the arm and the thing you're grabbing. And, you know, there are 50 million things you have to do. So the things that we can touch right now, without any doubt, real estate, international shipping. The third thing is space. The space industry needs a massive upgrade in terms of its technology because they too are doing things we on PDF files.
Okay, yeah, well, as always, it's eye-opening for me having conversations with you. So I hope other people also appreciated it. Burns, did you have something or?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your analysis with the hardcore privacy people and cypherpunks of Ethereum versus the Burning Man auxiliary people. I would ask you if I have the chance for some follow-up question. How can we make the Burning Man people pay for the inner core to improve itself and to keep the system running in a good way without being hijacked by Burning Man culture? As soon as marketers smell the loaf in the autumn with the Burning Man culture and just let crypto fall in itself with that.
Yeah, so the thing about Burning Man is that Burning Man is now mostly 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds going to Burning Man. The population has become very, very old, partly because Burning Man is now your dad's festival, and partly because Burning Man is just very expensive and hard to deal with. You know, it's a tough thing. You do get a generational rollover, right? The last couple of Burning Mans, they've had tickets left over that you could buy right up until the day of the festival. That was never the case 10 years ago. So if you think of that Burning Man thing as being on US soil, in a desert, formed in the 1980s and 1990s, you know, that stuff is now as old and as out of date as Woodstock was when I was a raver in like 93, 94, 95, right? You know, when I went to Burning Man in 96 for the first time, it was like, wow, this is the edge of the universe. And in 96, it was the edge of the universe. Now it's a bunch of, you know, 56-year-old people driving up in Winnebagos talking about the old days. Burning Man has become what the Grateful Dead was in the 1990s, right? It's an old show. The burners, as a culture, have lost a huge amount of momentum to things like Daisy Carnival and, you know, the rest of this kind of stuff, right? I can't remember what the big rave event is in Florida, but, you know, there's a bunch of this stuff and it's all gone very, very mainstream. But the weird, crazy, aggressive, anarchist youth bubble fringe, that's not America now. That's Nigeria, right? What you want to look for is the societies that have an enormous number of young people, right, who are looking for meaning, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for direction, they're looking for what they're going to make their lives about. They hate the systems that keep them down. They want to know why they can't have what everybody else wants. Nigeria, right? And, you know, my prediction is that biotech is going to get Africa, treatments and vaccines for the half a dozen really bad diseases that have held Africa back. Malaria is obviously the number one on that list. There are a bunch of others. I can't even remember the names of them, but horrible snail diseases, untreatable parasites, all the rest of that kind of stuff. From biotech, you get cures for those problems. And then at that point, the same kind of cultural processes that led to the 60s, that led to Burning Man, that led to raves in the 90s. I don't know if Nigerians are going to raves yet. I don't know whether they've invented something which is even more like a rave than a rave was, whether they've got some other thing that they're doing instead. But the idea that the cultures would have a lot of young people where the innovation is going to happen should shock nobody. And again, crypto is very, very, very focused on America, and America is old. It's established. Even Silicon Valley has become a static oligarchy, right? How are the demographics in Honduras? I bet it's a really young country relative to America. Right? So I would expect the massive cultural transforming power of crypto not to be felt in the established, oligarchies and plutocracies. I think it's going to be where there are an enormous number of young people that are willing to try a new thing because the old thing doesn't work for them. Burning Man in the 90s was a youth culture phenomenon.
Well, I do see some parallels with Zuzulu, so that's interesting.
Yeah, me
the
too.
vibes of Zuzulu.
Me too. That's what I'm saying, right? That's exactly what I'm saying. So if you think of this as, the establishment of a new generation of social experiments, you're a new generation of social experiments.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So I think with that we'll let you go. But I really appreciate. As always.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And I'm easy to get hold of. I'm leashless on Twitter. And yeah, by all means, reach out. And the company is Materium. Very good.